Welcome to Edge Industry Review Fireside Chat, Analyst Edition. I'm Jim Davis, editor of Edge Industry Review, and with me today is Daniel Beazer, contributing analyst at Structure Research. What we're going to talk about today is AWS and the recently concluded reInvent conference. Dozens and dozens, and maybe even more dozens of product introductions, but a few key ones to talk about revolve around the wireless infrastructure and the telecom industry, as well as some interesting customer acquisition wins that AWS revealed. So I want to ask Daniel, what was your impression of the keynote by the new CEO, Adam Selipsky? And we can go from there into talking about AWS Private 5G wireless services.
Well, as you pointed out, it was his first keynote. And Selipsky is someone who spent a lot of time at Amazon, though he was away, I believe, at Tableau for a while before coming back again. It didn't seem to me that there were a great difference in terms of strategy and what he was aiming to achieve. There was probably some in tone. I would say that Selipsky is considerably less rah-rah. Is that the right American way of saying it? It's like something, you know, for my little England British sensibilities, maybe a lot of chest beating going on. He seemed to be there seems to be a lot more sort of even presentation style. But despite the sort of more modest manner, I guess there were still some pretty interesting, some almost quote unquote shocking announcements in the sense that Amazon has taken this leap into the network industry with private 5G. It isn't actually, of course, Amazon actually already previously had some sort of managed WAN products, but this very major announcement, I think, will send quite a few shockwaves, at least through the telco industry. And there was a bit of theatre there as well, because after talking about the product and going through the basics of it, Selipsky then brought up onto the stage I think it's the chief network officer of Dish, the 5G network pioneer, and invited him to talk about his very own private 5G offering powered by AWS as well. And you could almost feel that the temperature in the audience hall was going down there a bit. But I mean, I guess it's pretty interesting to think of how this private 5G might work out. I mean, you know, as you'd expect with Amazon, there's a lot of emphasis on the fact that the payment structure is simple. There's not a per device mechanism. It's easy to install. We just send you the bits. You just put it in yourself, and we'll manage it from there on there out. You don't need to get Spectrum. We just use a spare Spectrum. So it's very, very much an Amazon sounding product. And who knows, it may well be very, very, very interesting. I do wonder how many enterprises are out there who feel confident about installing a 5G network in a factory all on their own, you know, working out where to put all their heads and everything like that. I've heard that called out as a criticism of it, but nevertheless, it's a pretty extraordinary announcement. And I think another telling comment from Selipsky was that he says so far, he says only 15% of the IT budget is spent on cloud, and we've got masses of headroom to go. Now that IT budgets, at least I think a third, and possibly even more in some cases, the IT budget is on comms. So I think that would, if I were a telco, that would have me fairly, I don't know, frightened. Maybe not frightened, but I'll be certainly watching out.
Wary would be at least one of the words, especially since AWS is working with companies like Verizon on edge computing plus wireless in a different setting. But of course, we have a common scenario here where cloud providers are competing with, and yet also cooperating with, in some cases, telecom companies. And as you noted, you know, Dish is using AWS for certain parts of its infrastructure, but AWS is going to possibly compete against it as well. I suppose there's some ways to work out some cooperation where, you know, the telcos are more responsible for the design and implementation and stage, consulting with clients, bringing clients into the AWS fold. But certainly there's a a fair amount of tension there.
Yes, and I think you should never underestimate Amazon's ability to execute versus everyone else. And in that context, I think it's quite interesting that Dish themselves had promised to actually bring some prototypes to reInvent for developers to look at and play with, and they didn't. There was a sort of terrible silence with that. It's quite hard to imagine Amazon, making a promise like that and then not living up to it. Yeah, I mean, the dance between the Microsoft, Azure, Google, and AWS and the carriers is going to be one of those sort of key events, really, of the build out of the edge, and what exactly happens there. And you can see, if you go back to the summit, you can see when AT&T quote unquote sold its 5G technology to Microsoft, and then only a week or two later, the CEO went on the earnings call and said, "I want to, straighten out that we absolutely are not letting them have our core. We are not letting our core. It's our crown jewels." You can see that there's a lot of heart searching going on there. I think ultimately that if there's a side of them that sees that Microsoft and Amazon, possibly even Google, can just do software and networking an awful lot better than they can, and a lot more cheaply. So why not use that? And why not use the automation or the other tools that you get with it? And then there's another side that thinks that, well, if they're doing all of that, then what exactly are we doing? Consulting. It's a very similar sort of dilemma to the dilemma of the hosting industry, which we both know and love, Jim. And I've worked in many years had when Amazon appeared. I mean, how do we deal with this threat? Do we just ignore them, or do we put a wrap around it and say, from now on we will be a sort of managed cloud shop? And in the end, most of them actually, willingly or unwillingly, ended up going into the managed cloud shop. Okay.
Rackspace being one of those examples of a company that had a cloud offering but wound up becoming, the wrapper of services around AWS services.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, the managed hosting industry always sort of fell down, in my view, on the fact that it said it was managed, but they just give you a password to a firewall. Really, it wasn't really that managed. So when you have another company that did something very, very similar, but with an awful lot more functionality and at a much cheaper price, and on a pay-as-you-go service, it became pretty hard to justify why anyone would really want to stay with you.
Well, speaking of staying with folks, AWS isn't without competition in this space. Microsoft having made acquisitions for wireless private 5G itself. And I suppose, one of the arguments also against AWS is outages. We don't want to just have entire infrastructure placed only in Amazon. Yes. An outage yesterday, and again in the AWS East region, maybe points out to that multi-vendor strategy at the very least. But I don't know if you have some thoughts to share there.
Yes, well, I think that there's a lot of talk about multi-cloud and people seamlessly flipping workloads from one cloud to another. I guess that's the promise of containers. I do wonder about the reality of it, because of course it's not. You can have OpenShift and whatever these tools that really promise to do exactly that. But I mean, even if you can just flip the bare compute and storage, well, that the issue also becomes the security standard. All the wrappings. Those are the things that are very, very hard to move. And so I think actually, not only I believe are very few people doing it, but it's hard to actually see how that's going to change. I mean, if you move from one provider to another, most people choose an Amazon or a Google or whatever. One of the really driving reasons why you see people choosing Google over Microsoft or Amazon making these choices is because of the ecosystem. So if you're just sort of freely moving around from one cloud to another, you really just lose that, what was probably the major benefit of you going to the cloud in the first place. And I think in terms of outages now, I mean, I think that Amazon's distribution over the US is so extensive that I don't think it's terrifically hard one would have thought, to architect your workloads so that you wouldn't be at risk in the way that obviously an awful lot of people were yesterday. It's
They
quite
still
funny.
are. I feel like I've written about impact of outages, on cloud providers for a long time, and keep saying, isn't it possible to architect your application so that having your whole website down for hours on end isn't going to happen? But
Right. Having your own,
it's evidently a bit of a challenge, especially if you were
and
thinking of trying to run in a hot configuration, across multiple cloud providers. But if the network, breaks, how are you shipping, data out over to that other configuration?
yeah, which has always been the problem. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Netflix's Chaos Monkey and Chaos Gorilla, they're really quite old now. I mean, they were. You'd have thought more people had taken that to heart.
Well, so speaking of reliability, there was another announcement from Nasdaq about using Outposts, Outpost Edge inside a Nasdaq data center, which was an interesting take on the whole edge computing question. But what was your impression of that announcement?
Well, Equinix is, because that's where the Nasdaq
that's where the facility
Outpost
is.
Going to sit. Equinix is one of their New Jersey data centers. Yeah, I mean, they'll be absolutely delighted with that characterization, because Equinix argues that the edge is the interconnect, is the IBX, and basically where all traffic meets is really the edge. So they'll be absolutely delighted with that. Yes, it's quite an interesting move, and I think it really, Nasdaq's been a long-running poster child for AWS, and not quite Netflix, but certainly one that makes regular appearances at re:Invent. And they've recently they're actually talking when they were on the stage. I think they were after Dish, or were they before? I can't remember. About how they'd moved actually their a large part of their infrastructure over to Amazon Cloud, and they were, because that Nasdaq, a large part of Nasdaq's businesses is selling services to other exchanges as well as other financial institutions, and they offer that service in all around the globe. Loads and loads of people use it, and they actually ingest ingest, I think, 60 billion records in the evening from all around the world onto Amazon's onto S3, and then they update that by the following morning. That's an extraordinarily large amount of data, and really just shows you how large the volumes and the frequency, of the data that's produced by financial services are. And I think the Nasdaq thing, deal with Outposts, also shows you, because this is going to be a joint product, it shows you a couple of things. First of all, I think it shows you that when Amazon thinks something is strategic, and they've made a big play this year on on verticals, on having vertical specific, sector specific clouds, and finance and healthcare, obviously two of those, that they will actually throw a lot of resource and a lot of money at a joint project like this, because this project with Nasdaq is actually going to be something that they want to sell to these financial institutions. It's not something they're doing to support some operation for Nasdaq. It is actually something they want to sell. And actually later on in the keynote, it's a very long keynote, I actually listened to all of it right to the end of the 2 hours. They actually talked about another project, a data analytics and analytics product that they're launching with Goldman Sachs, which will basically, what will happen is Goldman Sachs will deploy their AI tools and machine learning tools onto Amazon, and they'll package that up and sell it, and it will integrate back into Amazon's data exchange. So I think these kind of product partnership things, I think we're going to see these more in healthcare. So in finance, and also in healthcare, they announced the third one with Pfizer, again for analytics and machine learning. So this is very much, I think, the direction you're going to see Amazon going down. And interestingly as well, actually very much the same direction you see Microsoft going down as well. In fact, I think I'd say Microsoft has been talking about it a bit longer.
Yeah, certainly. I think all indications are that those deeper relationships that are maturing over time mean that cloud infrastructure from AWS, in the form of Outpost in this case, gets put in on the edge, but the edge is really just going to be the center of the enterprise, right? Yeah, there's plenty of more work to do there. It certainly was interesting to see all of those announcements coming out. they always have a big bang. And of course, this year's event, I think got some extra reaction because a lot of people were in Las Vegas for the event as opposed to, just doing something online. So there's a lot of interest and emotion around that. Anyways, yeah, I think that covers a lot of ground for AWS for today. Daniel, I want to thank you for joining us on the Fireside Chat, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
All the best then.